Depression. Depression is more than sadness. Sadness comes and goes. Depression stays. It settles into your mind like heavy fog and slowly drains meaning out of everything around you. The disorder changes how your brain handles chemicals like serotonin and dopamine, the systems connected to motivation, pleasure, focus, and emotional stability. When those systems stop functioning properly, even basic living starts feeling impossible. You wake up exhausted no matter how much sleep you get. Activities you once loved feel empty. Food loses flavor. Music feels dull. Conversations feel distant. Your brain convinces you that happiness is gone forever. And because depression changes the way you think, that belief starts feeling like reality instead of illness. The terrifying part is how quiet it is. Depression doesn't always look dramatic from the outside. Many people still go to work, smile at friends, reply to messages, and pretend everything is fine while internally feeling completely disconnected from life. Simple tasks become overwhelming. Showering feels exhausting. Answering a text feels mentally draining. Your thoughts slow down, your body feels heavy, and your future begins looking blank. Some people sleep constantly just to escape consciousness. Others can't sleep at all because their mind refuses to stop spiraling. Over time, isolation grows because pretending to be okay takes more energy than you have left. Depression slowly rewires your identity until numbness starts feeling normal. It whispers so consistently that eventually you forget what excitement, hope, or peace used to feel like. Generalized anxiety disorder. Anxiety is supposed to protect you from danger, but generalized anxiety disorder traps your brain in permanent survival mode, constantly preparing for disasters that usually never happen. Your nervous system stays activated all day, flooding your body with stress hormones even when nothing is actually wrong. Every thought becomes a possible threat. You replay conversations repeatedly, convinced you embarrassed yourself somehow. You imagine worst-case scenarios before simple decisions. Your mind jumps endlessly between problems, creating fear out of possibilities instead of reality. What if something goes wrong? What if they're angry? What if you fail? What if something terrible happens tomorrow? The thoughts never stop long enough for your body to relax, and the anxiety isn't only mental. Your body feels it constantly. Tight chest, racing heartbeat, upset stomach, shaking hands, muscle tension, exhaustion. Your nervous system burns energy like you're running from danger all day, even while sitting completely still. People often say things like just calm down or stop overthinking, but anxiety disorder isn't ordinary worrying. Your brain physically struggles to separate imagined danger from real danger. Over time, the fear changes your behavior. You avoid situations that trigger uncertainty. You over-prepare for everything. You become mentally trapped in anticipation instead of actually living. And eventually, the world starts feeling smaller because your brain treats safety like something fragile that can disappear at any moment. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, is not laziness. It's not a lack of intelligence or discipline. It's a neurological condition that affects how the brain regulates attention, motivation, impulses, and executive function. The part of the brain responsible for organization, planning, focus, and self-control develops differently, creating a constant disconnect between intention and action. People often misunderstand ADHD because they assume attention is completely absent. But ADHD isn't about lacking focus. It's about lacking control over focus. You can spend hours hyper-focused on something stimulating while being completely unable to begin a simple, boring task. Your brain constantly chases dopamine, making routine responsibilities feel mentally painful. You forget appointments, lose important items, interrupt conversations, start projects without finishing them, and struggle with deadlines even when you genuinely care. Time feels distorted. Minutes disappear unexpectedly. Small tasks pile up until they become overwhelming mountains. And internally, there's constant frustration because you know exactly what you should be doing while feeling unable to force yourself into action. Impulsivity adds another layer. Speaking before thinking, spending money recklessly, making emotional decisions instantly, constant restlessness. Fidgeting? Racing thoughts. Your mind rarely feels quiet. The exhausting part is that many people with ADHD grow up being labeled careless, irresponsible, lazy, or unmotivated, when in reality they're often trying harder than everyone around them just to complete basic daily tasks. ADHD creates invisible friction between your brain and the world. turning ordinary responsibilities into constant mental battles. Obsessive-compulsive disorder. OCD traps the brain inside cycles of fear and ritual. It begins with intrusive thoughts, unwanted fears, images, or urges that invade the mind repeatedly. These thoughts feel horrifying, urgent, and impossible to ignore. Your brain becomes convinced that something terrible will happen unless you perform certain actions to prevent it. The obsessions vary endlessly. Fear of contamination, fear of harming someone accidentally, fear of leaving appliances on, violent intrusive thoughts, religious fears, existential fears. The terrifying part is that people with OCD usually understand the thoughts are irrational, but the anxiety feels so intense that logic stops helping. That's where compulsions appear. Repeated hand washing, endless checking, counting rituals, arranging objects perfectly, repeating phrases silently, seeking reassurance constantly. The rituals temporarily reduce anxiety, but only for a moment. Soon the fear returns stronger, demanding the ritual again. And over time, the cycle becomes prison-like. Real OCD isn't about liking things clean or organized. It's psychological torture. Hours disappear into compulsions. Skin cracks from washing, minds become exhausted from constant fear monitoring. The disorder convinces people that thoughts themselves are dangerous, that thinking something bad somehow increases the chance of it happening. Even when someone knows the fear makes no sense logically, the emotional terror feels completely real. OCD steals peace by turning the mind against itself. Post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, happens when trauma becomes trapped inside the nervous system instead of fully processing and fading over time. After terrifying experiences like abuse, violence, accidents, war, or near-death situations, the brain can become permanently stuck in survival mode. Normally, once danger passes, the nervous system calms down. With PTSD, that reset never fully happens. The brain keeps reacting as though the trauma is still occurring in the present moment. Flashbacks can feel terrifyingly real. A sound, smell, location, or random trigger suddenly throws the person back into the experience physically and emotionally. Their heart races, breathing changes, muscles tense. Fear explodes instantly because the brain believes the danger has returned. Hypervigilance becomes constant. Loud noises feel threatening. Crowds feel unsafe. Sleep becomes difficult because nightmares repeatedly replay trauma. The person scans environments constantly looking for danger even in safe situations. Emotional regulation changes too. Some people become numb and disconnected. Others become angry, reactive, or emotionally unstable because their nervous system never truly relaxes. PTSD doesn't just create painful memories. It changes how safety itself feels inside the body. People begin avoiding places, people, and situations connected to trauma until their world slowly shrinks. The brain is trying to protect them, but the protection becomes exhausting. Instead of living in the present, they remain psychologically trapped inside survival mode long after the actual danger ends. Bipolar disorder causes extreme shifts in mood, energy, behavior, and thinking. These shifts go far beyond ordinary mood changes. During depressive episodes, everything can feel hopeless, exhausting, and emotionally numb. But during manic episodes, the brain can become intensely overactive. Thoughts race uncontrollably. Sleep suddenly feels unnecessary. Confidence becomes dangerously inflated. Some people spend huge amounts of money impulsively, start unrealistic projects, drive recklessly, or make life-changing decisions without understanding the consequences. Mania can initially feel productive or euphoric, but as it intensifies, judgment becomes distorted. Some people begin experiencing delusions, paranoia, or hallucinations during severe episodes. Relationships often suffer because loved ones struggle to understand the unpredictable changes. The disorder can feel like being pulled violently between emotional extremes, never fully able to stabilize. In the middle for long. Schizophrenia. Schizophrenia affects how the brain processes reality itself. The disorder can involve hallucinations, delusions, disorganized thinking, and emotional disconnection. Hallucinations can feel completely real. A person may hear voices speaking to them constantly, criticizing them, threatening them, or convincing them of things that aren't true. Delusions distort perception even further. Someone may genuinely believe they're being watched, followed, controlled, or targeted by hidden forces. Thoughts become fragmented and difficult to organize logically. Conversations may become confusing or disconnected because the brain struggles to maintain clear thought patterns. Emotional expression can flatten as well. Some people struggle to show emotion outwardly even when feeling intense emotions internally. The disorder often creates fear and isolation because reality itself no longer feels reliable. Eating disorders are not simply about food or appearance. They are complex psychological disorders deeply connected to control, self-worth, trauma, anxiety, and emotional pain. Disorders like anorexia nervosa involve extreme restriction of food intake, intense fear of weight gain, and distorted body image. Even when dangerously underweight, the person may still see themselves as overweight because the brain's perception becomes warped. Bulimia nervosa often involves cycles of binge eating, followed by purging behaviors driven by shame and panic. Binge eating disorder involves consuming large amounts of food rapidly while feeling emotionally out of control. Many eating disorders become deeply secretive. People hide behaviors, lie about meals, obsessively count calories, or develop rigid rituals around eating. Over time, the body begins breaking down physically from malnutrition, stress, and exhaustion. But psychologically, the disorder often becomes tied directly to identity and control, making recovery emotionally terrifying. Dissociative disorders. Dissociation is the brain's way of mentally escaping overwhelming stress or trauma. Instead of fully processing painful experiences, the mind disconnects from reality, emotions, memories, or even identity itself. During dissociation, people may feel detached from their body, as though they're watching themselves from outside. The world can suddenly feel unreal, foggy, or dreamlike. Time may disappear unexpectedly. Some people lose memories connected to trauma entirely in severe dissociative disorders. Identity itself can become fragmented into separate states. These conditions usually develop as survival responses to overwhelming trauma, especially during childhood. The brain learns to separate unbearable experiences from conscious awareness in order to survive emotionally. But over time, that separation can make reality itself feel unstable and disconnected. Mental disorders are not personality flaws. They are medical and psychological conditions that affect the brain, nervous system, emotions, behavior, and perception. And although each disorder affects people differently, they all remind us how fragile and complex the human mind truly is. Some people suffer silently for years without anyone noticing. Others spend their entire lives fighting battles invisible to everyone around them. Mental illness can affect anyone regardless of age, intelligence, success, or background. And for many people, surviving each ordinary day already requires enormous strength. But despite how overwhelming these disorders can become, recovery and treatment are possible. Therapy, medication, support systems, lifestyle changes, and human connection can help people regain stability and hope over time. Healing is rarely quick or linear. Some days feel manageable, other days feel impossible, but progress often happens slowly, through small moments that slowly rebuild trust in life, in other people, and in yourself. Understanding mental illness matters because misunderstanding creates stigma, shame, isolation, and silence. Many people avoid seeking help because they fear being judged, dismissed, or treated differently. But mental disorders are not signs of weakness. They are deeply human conditions connected to biology, experience, trauma, environment, and psychology. The brain is incredibly powerful, but also deeply vulnerable. And sometimes the most important thing a person can hear is simply that they are not alone. Autism spectrum disorder. Autism affects how people experience communication, social interaction, sensory information, and patterns of behavior. It is called a spectrum because autism can appear very differently from one person to another. Some autistic people may struggle with verbal communication, while others communicate fluently but still experience deep social exhaustion. Eye contact can feel uncomfortable or overwhelming. Small talk may feel confusing or unnatural. Social rules that seem automatic to others often require conscious effort to understand. Sensory experiences can also become extremely intense. Bright lights, loud sounds, crowded environments, or certain textures may feel physically unbearable. Many autistic people rely heavily on routines because predictability creates safety and stability. Sudden changes can trigger intense stress or emotional overload. Some people develop highly focused interests that become deeply meaningful and comforting. Autism is not a lack of emotion or intelligence. In fact, many autistic people experience emotions extremely intensely, but express them differently from social expectations. The world is often designed around neurotypical communication and behavior, which can make autistic individuals feel misunderstood, isolated, or constantly pressured to mask their natural behavior. Masking involves consciously suppressing natural behaviors in order to appear socially acceptable. Over time, masking can become emotionally exhausting and damaging to identity. Borderline personality disorder. Borderline personality disorder creates extreme emotional instability, intense fear of abandonment, unstable relationships, impulsive behavior, and rapidly shifting self-image. Emotions often feel overwhelmingly intense and difficult to regulate. Small conflicts or perceived rejection can trigger enormous emotional pain. Relationships may alternate between extreme closeness and sudden emotional distance. A person with BPD may deeply fear being abandoned, even in situations where abandonment is not actually happening. That fear can create desperate attempts to avoid rejection or emotional separation. Identity may feel unstable as well. Goals, values, relationships, and sense of self can shift rapidly depending on emotional state. Many people with BPD also struggle with chronic emptiness, emotional numbness, self-destructive behavior, or intense anger. The disorder is often deeply connected to trauma, invalidation, or unstable attachment during early development. Despite harmful stereotypes, people with BPD are not manipulative monsters. They are often individuals experiencing emotional pain so intense that relationships and identity become extremely difficult to stabilize. Addiction and substance use disorders. Addiction changes the brain's reward system. Substances like alcohol, opioids, nicotine, stimulants, or other drugs artificially flood the brain with dopamine and reward signals. Over time, the brain begins adapting to those artificial highs. Natural pleasure becomes weaker, cravings become stronger, and self-control becomes increasingly impaired. Addiction is not simply a lack of willpower. The disorder physically changes brain chemistry, decision-making, stress regulation, and impulse control. Many addictions begin as attempts to escape emotional pain, trauma, loneliness, stress, or mental illness. Substances temporarily numb distress, create euphoria, or provide relief from unbearable emotions. But eventually, the substance itself becomes another source of suffering. Relationships break down, physical health deteriorates, careers collapse, and the addiction gradually takes priority over survival itself. Withdrawal can become terrifying physically and psychologically, trapping people in cycles they desperately want to escape. Recovery often requires enormous support, treatment, and long-term healing. But recovery is possible even after years of suffering.